Hello, everyone, and welcome to Friday at 4. I hope you had a good week. My name is James Schreiber, and as always, we are joined by Amanda Van Deerheiden. Happy week, Amanda. Happy Friday.
Hi, everyone. We have a really exciting topic for you today.
Great. Amanda, I'm going to let you drive this conversation, and I think this is a conversation more in gear to what is really going on within the interview and talent acquisition process within companies. Just some of our sites are 10,000-foot views and some specific examples as well. So I think that everyone's going to find this, or hope that everyone finds this, pretty interesting, and we look forward to your comments. Okay, Amanda, take it away.
All right. So a small part of what Jim and I do for organizations is help them, we've talked about this, help attract, find, and retain the top talent. So we've talked a lot about this. But one of the things, there's a lot of information out there from the individual's perspective of how to properly interview, how to follow up after an interview. But there's not as much content on what an organization should be doing to structure said interview process. How are they branding themselves in their interview process? What takeaways are all the people, let's say you have, 10 candidates and you only have one position to fill. There's a lot that can be done with those other 9 people that you're not filling the role for. And I know this is something that Jim has worked with clients on, and I definitely want to get his take on this, but organizations are falling down with the interview process. It used to be a one-way street. It used to be, is the employer deciding to select this person for a job? But that is not the case with today's numbers and what's going on in the marketplace today. Organizations have to be so much more keen and responsible about how they are positioning and focusing and directing their interview process, because those people that are coming to your door, they, especially with the world of the internet, right? If they badmouth the process or the people, it could dampen your reputation. And more importantly, you might lose great candidates if you're not professionally, designing your programs. If your interviews are not actually interviewing for what you think you're interviewing for. So I'm going to let Jim tell a little bit of anecdotal about like simple database stuff that I know he's shared with me in the past. So Jim, tell me about how organizations are falling down when it comes to their candidate pipelines.
Yeah, so the thing that we have to realize, and Amanda touched on it, is in the last, I would say, 5 to 6 years, especially in the last year and a half to 2 years, things have truly changed. The candidate who is coming into process is actually interviewing the company. When I reach out to a candidate, and I'm in a unique position because I work for both clients and I work for candidates as well. And when I reach out to a candidate and I'll tell them that XYZ company might be interested in reviewing their background and skill set, I happen to know that the first thing they do, or one of the first things they do, is get on LinkedIn, go to Google, and research the company. They want to know as much about that organization and sometimes the people that they are going to be speaking with as possible. And they should, because ultimately it is their life, it is their career. So what goes on now is somebody is brought into the interview process. It is not a one-way street anymore. The candidate is actually interviewing the client, the company, just as well. They are looking at the processes. They are looking at how they've been treated. They are looking at the questions they've been asked. They are looking at the fluidity of what will the next steps be. And if a company falls down in any of those parameters, they run a real risk of losing the candidate. And it's more than just losing the candidate, because yes, candidates drop out, companies make decisions. It's about the candidate experience. The worst thing that can happen after an interview or meeting, when I get on the phone to do a summary call with a candidate, is have them say, I would not go work for that company under any circumstances. This is what happened. This is the way I was treated, or they weren't prepared for my background, or they couldn't explain the position. They really didn't understand the role that they were trying to pitch to me, that they were trying to sell to me. That is terrible. And more the real reason, and I'm getting passionate, and excuse me for that, but the real reason is because that candidate will talk to other candidates. And then you have a company now who's out there trying to market themselves, bring in top talent in a market that's hard to do that. And you might have candidates saying, well, I heard XYZ about this company, and it's not somebody I would, or some organization I'd like to work with right now. That's just the tip of the iceberg, Amanda. There are specific examples, and then there are solutions that we can provide as well to help better make the candidate experience to a point that both the client, the company, and the candidate feel good about the meeting, even if it doesn't move to the next level. That's the key here.
Absolutely. And, just to add one small point until we move on to the next topic, I can't tell you how many times I've submitted a job application, which takes effort and it takes work, and it's not even acknowledged, or I get an auto email and I never hear back from the company again. So maybe I didn't fit in with the criteria or whatever it was, but that's a loss. That's a missed opportunity, because a lot of times those people are still in your database. Are you revisiting it when you have a new open role? Where are you starting from? So there's so many different angles we can approach this from the organization standpoint of the full life cycle of the candidate experience, from the time, from their branding, how people are seeing you, like Jim said, online, to the submittal process and the database and the storage and the data management, to the actual designing an experience, to designing and understanding exactly how to even test people's skills. And so that brings us to our next topic, subtopic within this topic. And the big thing, I'm going to say something very controversial right now, and it's been proven multiple times, and yet it still exists. Face-to-face interviews are not the most effective way to identify if a candidate is going to be successful in the role you want. But people love it, but people do it, but we've always done it this way, right? We want to meet people, and we're a good judge of character, and we're not biased. Not true. We all have bias. We all, are going to have, I'm not going to get into the topic now because I could go on and on about it, but face-to-face interviews are not the effective way to find the right person for the job. They're not, but yet they're always used. So you say you want to still meet with the person. Great. I agree. I like people too. But there's other parts of the process that should be incorporated to make sure that the person can actually do the job that you want them to do. Jim, do you want to touch on this, and then I'll give more examples?
This is something that I push with clients all the time, which is, look, phone interviews, assessment tests should be the driver. The meeting, the face-to-face meeting, should be the last thing that is done. And that should be when you're pretty sure from both parties that you want to move forward with an offer. Because what we don't want to have happen is something from a one-on-one or a one-on-two or three when they're meeting that puts and I'm going to use a bad term, that puts a prejudice of some way in the mind of the company that has nothing to do with whether this person has the ability to do the job. You can pull that out during conversations. You can pull that out with assessment tests. The face-to-face should be the last thing in which you're basically coming in to say, you know what, we'd like to move forward, and meet the person with a handshake and then whatever the next steps are. To put the face-to-face meeting as the first possible interaction between the candidate and the company, you're doing your disservice to both the company and you're doing the disservice to the candidate, because you're not looking at skills and background at that point. You're looking at many, many other factors. And quite frankly, that's really not the right way to hire someone, because ultimately you are hiring a person based on their experiences, based on their background, and based on what you believe is their ability to fulfill that position. Everything else is irrelevant, period. It just doesn't matter. And so I get, again, passionate when it comes to that. I'd also like to say this about candidates who go in and do their, again, due diligence, look at LinkedIn, look who the hiring manager is, look what the company is all about. It really would make a lot of sense, and I push this with my clients. Hiring managers need to go in and look at their LinkedIn profile. They need to have an understanding of what somebody is going to see, as well as not being hypocritical when they're looking at a resume and they look down and they say, well, this person has only been with jobs for 2 years or 3 years, or jumped from this industry to this industry. Those people actually go on and they look at the hiring manager. And I can tell you in real life examples where I've got calls that said, you know what, this hiring manager hasn't been with the company long enough for me to want to go there. Or this hiring manager has moved from company to company. I'm not sure this is where I want to end up. So be aware of your public profile, not just from a company standpoint, but from a management standpoint. Those are the things I think, when I talk about companies, when Amanda goes into companies and we talk about the candidate experience, understanding that the candidate experience is also the branding that you're putting out there as a company. And you need to be well aware, because candidates have choices. They do not have to work for you in this market. And even though we see numbers change a little here and there, the overall economic impact is unemployment is low, talented people are in demand, and they're going to be in demand for the next 3 to 5 to 7 years.
Yeah. So taking it back to, so you might be feeling overwhelmed right now. So what am I supposed to do if it's not just a face-to-face interview? And it depends on the job that you're filling. So one of the things that I like to talk about, and I know Jim does too, is about even at the job description level, when you're creating and designing the job and talking about what the requirements are for the job, you need to make sure that those are real requirements. I can't tell you how many times I've seen data entry roles where they're requiring a master's degree. And I wonder, why are you asking for a master's degree for something that might not actually need it? So you need to make sure that because basically at the end of the day, this is the problem, right? For me, it's all about diversity and inclusion and making sure we're getting a diverse group of people. The numbers show the more diverse your work population are, better customer service, better gross margin profits for the organization, better retention rates, better place to work. And what happens with a face-to-face interview is you say, I like Jim, Jim's like me, I'm going to bring on more people like me, which is great to enjoy the people you work with. But if you don't have a diverse perspective, then you're not hitting all your your audience targets, right? You're not showing the world that you have different perspectives, and you're not going to have the best product, whatever your product is, if you have same like-minded people in a room thinking of something, because they're not going to be thinking of the nuances. So to give you specifics of things that you can do other than a face-to-face interview, there are work samples. There are, Jim had mentioned some assessments. You have to be careful with certain ones, but there are assessments that you can take. If it's a job where it's manual labor and, you're saying that somebody needs to be able to lift 50 pounds because they're going to be working in a warehouse, you can set up a real life on the day, 1 hour. Because the other thing I'm going to take this to, and you have to be conscious, it's a very fine line. You want to make sure that you're understanding the person's work output without exploiting them. Because I know that I've been part of an interview process where I've spent hours creating either a work sample or a presentation or something for this job that I don't even have yet, and I'm not being reimbursed for, and I'm not being compensated for. So it's a very fine line between wanting to see an actual example of and making sure that you're not asking too much of your candidates where they're feeling used. So it's a fine line, right? And that's why people like Jim and I exist, to come help with organizations and figure out this design process where you can get just the right amount of understanding what works without the negative connotations of, asking too much of your candidates.
Yeah, and I've always believed that Look, there are some when you are getting to that later stages, depending on the role, if it is a marketing role or a sales role or a role where you're going to interact or have to go out and speak with people, there might be projects or little examples that they'd like to see how you do, because that's part of your skill set. There's nothing wrong with that. But I've also seen companies go way overboard, almost asking for a thesis, um, you know, and when I see that, what it tells me is the company's just lazy. Hiring managers should be able to figure this stuff out if they're good at their craft without asking a potential candidate to spend hours and hours working on something for nothing more than a promise, maybe a promise of employment. So it's a fine line, and it's something in some cases that have to be looked at on a case-to-case basis. But I do have real life examples where people have fallen out of the interview process because they just didn't have the time to produce something, and then the company became irrelevant to them. There were too many other options out there for them to do that. And I do know that there's going to be people out there in companies saying, well, then they don't have to come work for us. And you're right, they don't. That's the answer. They don't. So look around, look at your retention rate, look at your open positions, look at your time to fill, and then ask yourself, why? Why is our retention rate low? Why are our open positions high? Why is the time to fill even longer than we would like? Those are the questions. When you get to those basic questions, then we can start to develop plans and procedures to help resolve those questions. But if those are the issues you're having, then something has to change. And doing the same thing over and over again is not going to make it any better. We know that's definition of insanity, but more importantly, it's the definition of inefficiency. So that's kind of the services, the passion that both Amanda and myself can bring to these type of topics. You know, when we go into companies and we talk about, you know, the negatives and positives of candidate experience, of job descriptions, of the interview process, of the branding for the interview process of managers, it does make a difference. And when we walk out, whether they utilize our services or not, they have enough information to institute change, which I can guarantee you that after every one of our meetings, change has been instituted because they have seen the problems up front and they realize at that moment they can't keep going the same way. Your thoughts, Amanda?
That's another great point you bring up is timelines. So I know certain companies that their interview process is 4 months. 4 months. That's an actual number of how long people are in the interview cycle for, which is a very long time to keep people engaged and interested in a position and moving forward. Whereas other organizations do it really fast. They know they want to fill the position. They know they want the best people, and the best people get grabbed by the market very quickly. And I've seen senior leaders be onboarded and go through the entire life cycle of the interview process in less than a month, which is expedited, right? So I've seen both sides, and that's another thing to consideration. So there's a lot of things to keep in mind, and it can be overwhelming, you know, like Jim mentioned, from the branding side, from the design side, from the timeline side. So we've talked a lot about the organizational structure. I want to take a little bit of time to dial it back and talk on the individual level, not the typical things that you normally hear about how to prepare for an interview. And Jim talked a little bit about, you know, making sure you're doing your research and your due diligence and make sure you have questions. That's great. That's important to know. But let's talk about it from the level that we're currently discussing it. And that phase, what I want to talk about from the individual perspective is the nuance. When you do go in for a face-to-face interview, when an organization is asking you for a sample of work, how are they making you feel? Do you feel burnt out and you don't even work there yet? Are they being professional? How do they talk to each other? How do they talk about each other? To Jim's point, are if you meet with 3 different people, are they on the same message? Do they all agree with what the roles, the responsibilities of the job are? Because that says a lot. You can find out a lot about an organization by observation, and to make sure it can be overwhelming when you're in the interview process and you're excited and you're trying to do a good job and present yourself in a great way. But you also want to see, how is the company representing itself? How are they treating each other? How are they treating you? When you walk away from that, how do you feel? If you've just gone through a 2-month interview cycle and then they just say, oh, thanks, send you an automated email, no thanks, we went with someone else, that can be really jarring. And you know what? They might lose me as a client, as a customer. So, there's something to be said about how the organization needs to set that up to not do that to people. But on the people side, on the individual level, what are observations are we making and taking from the way that is set up? Jim, your thoughts?
Yeah, it's a great point, because I view the interview process from a candidate side as, look, this should be the best time, right? They're courting you, you're courting them. Everybody should be on their best behavior, put their best foot forward, like in any relationship. If your first impression is, well, I'm not sure, then you're not sure. I mean, if you're not enjoying the interview, the candidate process in the beginning, studies show you probably won't enjoy working at that client, or you won't last as long as you thought you would last. You will always be on the lookout for what else is around the corner. Where else can I go? So be prepared. I mean, sometimes people apply to positions because it looks interesting. Wow, that's something I'd like to find out more about. And that's great. But if you're serious about your next position and you see positions or openings online, or you're contacted by a recruiter, or you're contacted by a company, and you go through the process, it should be a positive process. If it isn't positive, that should raise a red flag for you. And then you should talk to a professional. I mean, you could talk to Amanda or myself, and there's other companies out there that you could talk to, and talk about what those next steps should be. That's the professional side of things. Don't just take everything on good faith. Talk to people. Do your research, because when you go to work for a company, you're literally selling part of your life every day. That's what you're doing. You're giving them time and energy and your life that you could spend doing something else for a certain amount of, quite frankly, compensation. So be sure that it's what you want to do. If not, move on. But that's where our candidate services come in, and other companies' candidate services come in to talk about things and topics like that. Look, we've covered a lot today, and you can probably hear that both Amanda and I are extremely passionate when it comes to the candidate experience, the company's ability to bring and hire and retain good quality individuals, and doing that in a professional way, and how they go about doing that. What we'd like to hear from you, if you don't agree, tell us. If you agree or have real life examples, tell us. If you'd like to be a guest on this show, we're getting people who are writing to us saying, would love to be on there to share my experience. We'd love to hear from you. Do us a favor. Obviously, like this video, like our podcasts, which are on iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, and other outlets as well. Subscribe to them. That's a big help to us. But send us a note. Go to our website, www.grtas.net, gratis.net. Send us a note. We'd love to hear from you, talk with you. And if you want to be a guest, we'd love to explore that option as well. But if you disagree with what we said today, fine. I mean, that's what this is about. It's about open communication. And if you agree, great. Amanda, anything you'd like to say in closing?
That's it. We have a ton of resources that can help you, and we're happy to help in any way we can. So, like Jim said, please reach out. We're here for you, and we're excited to continue to learn and talk with you.
Well, everyone, thank you again for another great week. Our podcast downloads hit record numbers last week. Every week they're going up. I think Amanda and I both want to wish everybody a very, very happy Veterans Day. To all our veterans, we truly appreciate everything that you have done and your families have done for this country. And again, from Amanda and myself, have a great weekend. And until next week, it's Friday at 4.